The house was so unnaturally quiet that it didn't feel like nighttime anymore. It felt like the kind of silence that settles after a storm, thick and humming, as if the air itself knows something has broken and is waiting to see what happens next. The red glow of the digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m., its soft pulse the only sign of life in the dark room. Elena lay perfectly still beneath the covers, staring up at the faint outline of the ceiling fan above her. The blades weren't moving, but in her mind she could feel them turning anyway, slow and heavy and endless, the same way her thoughts kept circling back to the moment Marcus's hand struck her face. Before we go deeper, type strong in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It helps more people hear stories like this when women from all over the world show up in the comments. Her left cheek throbbed with a deep, angry heat that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. It wasn't the sharp sting of a slap. It was a deeper ache, the kind that settles under the skin like a coal and grows hotter with every second. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She could feel the bruise spreading, feel the swelling rising, feel the truth of what happened tightening around her like a band. Marcus had crossed the line again, but this time something inside her didn't fold or shrink. Something sharpened. Something woke up. Down the hall, Marcus had stopped pacing about an hour ago. She had listened to every heavy step he took after the argument, every frustrated mutter, and the door of the guest room slamming hard enough to rattle a picture frame on the wall. She waited to see if he might come back, if he'd try to apologize or escalate things again, but instead she heard the springs of the mattress protest under his weight, and then a long exhale as he collapsed onto the bed. And then the snoring began. Not the soft, comforting snore she used to smile at when they were newly married, but a loud, rumbling sound that felt entitled and careless. The sound of a man who believed tomorrow would reset everything in his favor. That sound used to soothe her. Tonight, it made her stomach turn. She pushed back the blanket slowly, moving inch by inch until her bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor. She felt the chill climb her legs and raise goosebumps along her arms, but she didn't stop. She stood up, careful not to let the bed creak, and stepped out into the hallway. The house felt hollow, as if it were holding its breath. The silence was broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional groan of old wooden beams settling, and Marcus's heavy snoring drifting through the dark. In the bathroom, she closed the door with a soft click and turned on the light. The reflection waiting for her in the mirror took her breath for a second. The bruise was already blooming across her cheek, a deep plum color that spread in uneven shapes, like a map of a place she never wanted to visit again. She didn't look away. She leaned forward and studied it carefully, as if committing every detail to memory. She picked up her phone with unsteady fingers. She turned off the flash, lifted the camera, and took one photo, then another, then several more from different angles. She emailed them to herself. Then she emailed them to her friend Laura. Then she created a new folder labeled "For When I'm Ready" and sent them there too. If you've ever trusted someone who ended up hurting you, type "I see you" and tell me where you're watching from. You don't have to explain, just knowing you're here matters. She opened her notes app and typed, "Call Laura at 5:00. Call non-emergency police at 5:30 IAM. Urgent care at 7:00. I'm in. Go early. Do not speak to Marcus until officers arrive. Make pancakes, bacon, berries, coffee. Make it look normal." She stared at that last line for a long time. The word normal didn't feel like a word anymore. It felt like an insult. Nothing about tonight or the past few years had been normal. She turned off the bathroom light and slipped back into the hallway. Marcus snored louder, a deep rumble from behind the closed door, sounding exactly like a man who had no fear of consequences. In the kitchen, she didn't flip on the overhead light. She kept the room in its soft, dim state by turning on only the stove light, letting the warm amber glow spill across the cold tiles. The burnt rice smell still lingered faintly. The argument had started over that pot, and she took a quiet breath before opening the pantry. Everything was arranged exactly the way Marcus liked it, labels forward, cans stacked by height, spices in alphabetical order. But tonight, the shelves didn't look rigid or controlling. They looked like choices. They looked like steps. She pulled out the pancake mix, maple syrup, the eggs, thick cut bacon, and the bag of blueberries she had planned to use for a lazy Sunday breakfast that never happened. She set the cast iron skillet on the stove and let the flame heat it slowly. She grabbed her grandmother Rosa's ceramic mixing bowl, the one repaired with glue ages ago, and whisked the batter until it smelled like vanilla and warm butter. The scent wrapped around her like a memory from a different life. She laid strips of bacon in the skillet, listening to the slow rise of the sizzle. She poured pancake batter onto the hot griddle and watched bubbles rise perfectly across the surface. She washed berries, arranged them neatly in glass bowls, toasted slices of sourdough bread, and brewed Marcus's favorite dark roast coffee. She set the table for 4, white plates, cloth napkins folded neatly, orange juice poured into the crystal pitcher. The setting looked warm and inviting, like a picture from an old magazine. But she didn't feel warm. She felt purpose. At 5:00 a.m., she called Laura, who answered on the first ring. When Elena whispered it happened again, Laura immediately said she was on her way and told her not to hang up. At 5:30 a.m., she called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher was calm and steady, her voice the first safe thing Elena had heard all night. Officers are on the way. 8 minutes. If your heart is beating a little faster right now, type keep going and drop the country you're watching from. You're here for a reason. Elena set her phone down and stood motionless in the kitchen, breathing slowly. Upstairs, Marcus's snoring suddenly stopped. The house froze with her, and the morning began. Elena kept her hands flat on the counter for a moment, grounding herself against the cool surface, while the dim kitchen light cast a soft halo across the table she had so carefully arranged. The pancakes sat stacked like small, quiet offerings, steam rising in gentle curls that caught the early morning light creeping through the blinds. The smell of bacon, berries, and coffee felt wrong in the pit of her stomach. Scents like these belonged to slow Sundays, lazy laughter, and warm memories, not mornings filled with fear and bruises. But today, that warmth had a different purpose. It wasn't comfort, it was clarity. The house creaked faintly overhead, and Elena instinctively froze. The sound of movement upstairs meant Marcus had shifted in bed or turned over, possibly waking up, and she held her breath without meaning to. When she heard nothing else, the invisible tension in her shoulders eased just enough for her to inhale again. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, turning the window into a soft gray sheet instead of a black mirror. She checked the time on her phone. 5:41 a.m. The officers would arrive any minute. She moved to the kitchen window and parted the curtain slightly. The cul-de-sac outside looked peaceful, every house dark except for one where an early riser's porch light had just clicked on. Birds hadn't even begun their morning chatter yet. It was the kind of quiet neighborhood where people waved at each other, exchanged homemade cookies during the holidays, and pretended they didn't hear arguments that became too loud. But today, someone would finally see the truth, even if the truth was wrapped in the smell of blueberry pancakes. Then she saw them. Headlights slowly sweeping across the street as 2 patrol cars turned the corner. They didn't use sirens. They didn't speak. They approached quietly, respectfully, like they already understood the fragile stillness of this house. The first car parked in the driveway. The second took the curb outside. Before the officers even opened their doors, Elena felt a cold wave wash over her legs. This was real. This was happening. This was the moment everything split into before and after. If you're still with me, Type "I'm here" and tell me the country you're watching from. It helps this story travel to someone who needs it right now. Two officers stepped out, one woman, one man. The female officer was shorter than Elena expected, compact and steady, with dark hair pulled into a low bun and eyes that scanned the house with practiced care. The male officer was taller, quiet, the kind of presence that fills a space without making any noise. They approached the front door with slow, measured steps. The female officer knocked gently, her knuckles tapping the wood with a confidence that said she'd done this more times than she wanted to admit. Elena opened the door before the second knock. "Ma'am, you're the caller?" the female officer asked, her voice warm enough to soften the moment, but firm enough to hold the weight of it. Elena nodded, swallowing the dryness in her throat. "Yes, I'm Elena." The officer's eyes flicked immediately to the bruise on her cheek. Her face didn't change, but something like anger pulsed behind her eyes. Anger on someone else's behalf, the most powerful kind. "Are you injured anywhere else?" "No," Elena said, voice steadying. "Just my face." "May we come in?" Elena stepped aside. The officers entered the kitchen and paused just long enough for the scene to register. The table set like a holiday, pancakes perfectly stacked, napkins folded like swans, coffee steaming in the French press, everything soft and inviting, everything screaming, "This is what you almost lost." The male officer began taking in the room with slow, methodical sweeps of his gaze. The female officer turned back to Elena. "Is he here?" "Yes, upstairs." "Is he aware we're coming?" "No." "Good, we'll handle that." Footsteps padded up the walkway outside, lighter, quicker. "Laura," she appeared in the doorway, still wearing sweatpants and a messy bun, her laptop tucked under one arm and keys dangling from her fingers. She didn't rush to Elena. She didn't overwhelm her. She just gave her a small, fierce nod, the kind friends give when the time for sympathy has long passed and the time for action has finally arrived. The male officer walked quietly toward the stairs while the female officer stayed beside Elena, asking her softly, "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Elena began speaking, but slowly at first, then with a kind of mechanical precision as the details unfolded. She described the burnt rice, the argument, the way Marcus's voice rose, the slap that knocked her back a step, the way the room went silent afterward. Laura typed everything, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The female officer's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted, more protective, more intent. Upstairs, movement, a confused, heavy shuffle. A voice calling out, "Elena?" The sound of a door opening. Then Marcus's footsteps hit the stairs, groggy and annoyed. Elena could picture the frown on his face, the disbelief he always carried whenever something wasn't about him. He reached the bottom step, yawning, and then froze at the sight of the officers in his kitchen. He didn't see Elena first. He saw the table, the pancakes, the bacon, the berries, the neatly folded napkins, and his face shifted into a smug, satisfied smile. "Good," he said, scratching the back of his head. "You finally understood." That was when he finally looked up. His smile dropped so fast it was almost comical. Officer Hayes stood near the patio door, notebook in hand. Officer Ramirez sat calmly at the table with a cup of coffee. Laura stood where Marcus usually sat at the head of the table, posture straight, eyes like flint. And Elena stepped out of the kitchen shadows, phone recording, bruise alive in the morning light. Marcus' face drained of color. If that moment hit you hard, type "wow" in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. This is the moment everything starts to turn. Officer Ramirez rose slowly from the chair. "Mr. Thompson, please step back and keep your hands visible." Her voice was calm but iron strong. "We're here regarding a report of assault and battery." Marcus blinked. "What? No, this is a misunderstanding. She's exaggerating. We had an argument, that's all." Officer Hayes stepped forward. "Sir, we'll ask you to remain where you are." Elena watched his bravado drain out of him, watched his eyes dart from one officer to the next, watched that fragile mask of control tear at the seams. For the first time in years, he didn't look powerful. He looked small, a man who was no longer the center of the story. "Sir," Ramirez said, "turn around, hands behind your back." Marcus sputtered objections, weak ones, predictable ones, but it didn't matter. Within seconds, Officer Hayes had him cuffed, reading him his rights with a steady monotone as he guided him out of the house. The sight of Marcus being walked through the doorway, hands restrained, head down, felt surreal and electric, like waking up inside a moment she once thought she'd never survive. When the patrol car pulled away, lights flashing silently, Elena stood in the doorway gripping the frame so she wouldn't tremble. Laura moved behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder, not to steady her, but to remind her she wasn't alone. If you're still here, type "stay strong" and drop your country in the comments. Someone from your country will see it and feel less alone. Elena exhaled slowly, as if it was the first real breath she had taken in years. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This quiet wasn't fear, it wasn't dread. It wasn't the silence after a storm. It was the silence before a new life begins. The front door clicked shut behind the officers, and for a moment, Elena just stood there, staring at the empty space where Marcus had been standing minutes earlier. The image of him in handcuffs replayed in her mind like a glitching video, his wrists pulled behind his back, his mouth moving faster than his brain. The look in his eyes when he realized no one in the room believed him more than they believed her bruise. It felt unreal, but the sting in her cheek anchored everything in place. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a fantasy she'd play in her head on bad nights and then bury by morning. It had happened. She had called. They had come. He was gone. Laura stepped around her and gently closed the curtain, blocking the view of the driveway and the slowly disappearing patrol car. "Come sit," she said, her voice low and steady, the same tone she used when talking to frazzled clients in court hallways. "You're shaking." Elena hadn't noticed until then that her hands were trembling. She looked down and saw her fingers twitching against her thighs, not violently, just a tiny, constant tremor that betrayed how much her body had been holding in. She let Laura guide her to the couch. Officer Ramirez followed them into the living room with a small notebook in one hand and a camera in the other. She moved inside the house with the careful respect of a guest, not the heavy presence of an intruder. For that, Elena was grateful. They sat her on the edge of the couch, and Ramirez pulled one of the armchairs close so they were nearly at eye level. "We're going to document everything while it's still fresh," she said. "Photos, your statement, any messages or emails you have. I know it's a lot, but this helps you, not him. Do you understand?" Elena nodded. Her throat was dry, but she managed. "Yes, I understand." Before we keep going, type evidence in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. A lot of people don't realize how important documenting things is until it's too late. Ramirez started with photos. She took out a small digital camera and asked Elena to tilt her head in different directions, lift her chin, turn slightly left and right. The shutter clicks were sharp and mechanical, echoing around the quiet room like tiny hammers. Each flashless snap felt like another brick being laid in a wall between past and future. It was uncomfortable, exposing, but also strangely empowering, like watching the truth be carved into stone. "Now," Ramirez said, lowering the camera and opening her notebook, "walk me through last night from the beginning. No rush, no pressure. Just tell it in order as best you can." Elena took a slow breath and began. She told them about the burnt rice, how the bottom of the pot had blackened while she was answering an email. She told them how Marcus had picked it up, held it in front of her, and let the anger spread across his face over something as small as a ruined side dish. The words came easier than she expected. It was almost like reading aloud from a book she had finally stopped pretending wasn't real. She explained how his voice rose, how his shoulders squared, how his insults changed from "what were you thinking" to "what's wrong with you," and then to the colder, more cutting things he whispered when he got really mean. She described the moment he stepped closer, the way she could smell the alcohol on his breath even before he raised his hand. She told him about the sound of the slap, sharp and shocking, wrapped in silence. She described the metallic taste in her mouth, the ringing in her ears, how time seemed to split right down the middle. While she spoke, Laura typed every word on her laptop, glancing up occasionally to meet Elena's eyes and give small nods that said, "You're doing fine, keep going." Officer Hayes stood near the doorway, quietly listening, his attention focused but unobtrusive. If you've ever had to retell a painful story just so people would believe you, type "I believe you" in the comments and say what country you're watching from. You might be the voice someone else needs to see. When she finished describing the slap, Elena explained what she did next. The bathroom, the photos, the email she sent, the notes she wrote, the calls she made. Ramirez asked careful follow-up questions. Has this happened before? Has he ever hit you anywhere else? Has he threatened you? Has he broken things in anger? Each question was a door. Elena opened all of them. "Yes," she said over and over, quietly but without hesitation. Yes, it had happened before. Yes, he had punched the wall next to her head once. Yes, he had thrown a plate. No, he had never apologized in a way that meant anything. Yes, she had been afraid many times, even when she pretended she wasn't. Laura's jaw tightened as she typed, but she didn't interrupt. This wasn't a debate. This was a record. When they finished the statement, Ramirez looked at Laura's screen and nodded slightly. "We'll attach this to the report. You did well," she said to Elena, and she meant it. "I'm going to recommend a temporary restraining order first thing this morning. With your photos and statement, the judge is likely to sign it." "A restraining order?" Elena repeated, the word sounding strange in her mouth, like something that belonged in other women's stories, not hers. "Yes," Ramirez said. "It means he won't be able to come back here, contact you, or get close to you legally. It doesn't fix everything, but it gives us tools to act if he tries anything." Laura leaned forward. "We'll file the paperwork together. I already have a draft ready. As soon as the courthouse opens, we go." For the first time, Elena felt something in her chest loosen. The idea that there could be an official line he wasn't allowed to cross, that someone besides her would enforce it, felt unreal and deeply comforting at the same time. "Do you need medical care?" Hayes asked gently. "Even if it's just for documentation, it's important." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Urgent care opens at 7 near my work. I wrote it down." Ramirez gave a faint, approving smile. "You're thinking clearly. That's good. Let them do an exam and make a record. Ask them for copies of everything. Bring it to court when you file." They wrapped up the formalities. Ramirez gave her a card with her direct line on it. Hayes took one last walk through the house, checking doors and windows, making sure nothing seemed off. When they were done, the officers stood in the kitchen, looking at the untouched breakfast. Ramirez glanced at the pancakes and then at Elena. "You cooked all this before we arrived?" she asked. "Yes," Elena said. "He likes pancakes." Ramirez's gaze softened, but she didn't pity her. She respected her. "Then make sure he doesn't get the last word on them," she said. "Eat your breakfast." If you're still watching and you feel that shift where fear starts turning into a plan, type "new start" and let me know where you're watching from. Those 2 words might be someone else's sign. After the officers left, the house felt different. Not lighter yet, but less suffocating. The front door had opened and closed, and with it something else had moved. Something unseen, but very real. Elena and Laura stood in the kitchen, facing the table like it was an altar. "Sit," Laura said, pulling out a chair. Elena sat. She picked up her fork with fingers that had finally stopped shaking. The pancakes were still warm. The syrup gleamed like amber in the morning light. Her cheek ached when she chewed, but she chewed anyway. Laura poured them both coffee, black and strong, and they ate in silence for the first few minutes, each bite a quiet act of defiance. "These are really good," Laura said eventually, her tone almost casual, like they were just two friends having breakfast on any ordinary day. Elena let out a small, surprised laugh. "I made them as a trap," she said. Laura nodded. "Then they did their job. Now they're for you." By the time the plates were half empty, the sky was brighter, and the world outside was waking up. Cars started moving on the main road a few blocks away. A dog barked down the street. Somewhere, an alarm went off repeatedly and then stopped mid-beat as someone hit snooze. They cleared the table together. Laura insisted on handling the dishes while Elena sat with her phone, scrolling through the emails she'd sent hours before, photos of her bruise, the notes she'd written, the evidence she'd quietly gathered like breadcrumbs leading away from a dark forest. At 7:10 a.m., they drove to urgent care. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Laura's car, watching her own house shrink in the side mirror. It didn't look like a crime scene. It looked normal. That word again. A neat little house with trimmed hedges and a painted front door. From the street, no one could see the bruise. No one could see the nights turned sour or the mornings twisted by fear. But the file starting to build in Elena's email, on Laura's laptop, and in the police database told a different story. At the clinic, the nurse called her name with that professional softness reserved for patients whose injuries are visible and not easily explained away. The doctor examined her cheek, gently pressing around the bruise, asking her to open and close her jaw, making notes on a chart. He recommended x-rays just in case there was a hairline fracture. He didn't question her story. He didn't ask if she had done something to provoke it. He just wrote assault by spouse and moved on like it was tragic but standard. She requested copies of everything. They printed them. She folded the papers with careful, almost ceremonial precision and placed them in a folder Laura picked up at the front desk. "Next stop," Laura said as they walked back to the car, "the courthouse." If you're watching this and feeling your chest tighten because this is too close to your reality, type courage in the comments and say the country you're in. You don't have to give details, just that one word can be your first step. They drove downtown in near silence, both of them knowing that what happened next would shape not just the day, but the next months, maybe years. Elena watched people on the sidewalk as they passed, parents with strollers, workers balancing coffee cups and phones, teenagers with backpacks slung over one shoulder. None of them knew her face. None of them knew that today she would walk into a courthouse and officially say, "This is enough." And somewhere, a man who thought a pancake breakfast meant he had won was sitting in a holding cell, wondering when the world would go back to normal. Elena knew something he didn't. There was no going back. The courthouse steps felt impossibly tall, each concrete slab carrying the weight of every woman who had walked up them before her, with a bruise hidden under makeup or a trembling hand tucked into a purse. Elena paused at the bottom, staring up at the wide double doors framed by tall columns that looked more like something out of an old photograph than a place she had driven past 100 times. Today, those doors mattered. Today, they were the thin line between what her life had been and what her life could become. Laura stood beside her, one hand on Elena's elbow. Not pulling, not pushing, just steadying. "You ready?" she asked softly. The truthful answer was no, but the right answer, the one her future self needed, was yes, so Elena nodded. Before we go inside, type "I'm with you" in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. You would be shocked how many women from your country walk into courthouses alone every day. Inside, the courthouse was colder than she expected. The air conditioning hummed in a low, relentless drone that made the hallways feel sterile. A few people sat on benches along the walls, mostly women, some with children, most with paperwork clutched tightly in their hands. Elena took them in, recognizing the same thin layer of exhaustion over strength, the same guarded shoulders, the same small flickers of shame mixed with stubborn resolve. The clerk's window was manned by a woman with silver hair tucked neatly into a bun and glasses hanging from a chain. She didn't smile, but her eyes were kind. Elena approached with Laura at her side and the folder of documents pressed flat against her palms. "I need to file a temporary restraining order," Elena said. Her voice didn't wobble, which surprised her. The clerk nodded once, as if Elena were one of dozens she saw every morning. "Name?" she asked. "Thank you." "Respondent?" "Marcus Thompson." The clerk pulled a thick packet of forms from a drawer, slid them through the small metal opening at the bottom of the glass, and said, "Fill out the incident section thoroughly. Attach your police report, photos, and medical documents. When you're done, bring it back. We'll submit it to the judge for review." They moved to a nearby table. Laura opened her laptop to double-check her notes while Elena began filling out the forms in long, looping handwriting. The questions were clinical. Describe the most recent incident. Describe any previous incidents. Describe why you feel unsafe. Describe what protective orders you are requesting. But nothing about what happened to her was clinical. Each description made her relive flashes of last night, the sound of the slap, the metallic taste in her mouth, the way she had stood in the bathroom staring at her bruise like it belonged to someone else. She wrote until her hand cramped and her cheek throbbed harder from the strain of holding her jaw tense. "Here," Laura murmured, gently rubbing her shoulder. "Switch hands for a minute. Shake it out." Elena exhaled and obeyed, flexing her fingers, letting the pain from the bruise remind her why she was doing this. When they returned to the clerk's window, the silver-haired woman gathered the papers, clipped them neatly, and said, "Please have a seat. The judge is reviewing TROs this morning. It shouldn't take long." Elena sank onto the wooden bench beside Laura. The courthouse buzzed softly with the sounds of shuffling papers, quiet conversations, and the occasional distant clatter of a door. A child somewhere in the hallway hummed a tune under their breath. It all felt strangely calm, like standing in the eye of a hurricane. If you've ever had to wait for a decision that could change everything, type "praying" in the comments and include your country. It helps other viewers know they aren't alone. For 10 minutes, a bailiff stepped into the hallway and called, "Thompson?" Elena stood. Her knees felt watery, but she kept her shoulders straight. The bailiff led them down a short hallway into a small courtroom where a woman in robes sat at the bench, flipping through a stack of papers. Her hair was shot through with silver, her gaze sharp, and her whole posture radiated that particular combination of weariness and authority that only judges seem to master. She didn't look up right away. She read the packet first, Elena's statement, the photos, the medical sheet, the police report, turning pages slowly, deliberately, like she was absorbing every detail. Finally, she lifted her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson?" she asked. "Yes," Elena said. "I've read your filings." The judge tapped a finger against the bruise photos. "You documented everything thoroughly. That was wise." Elena swallowed. "Thank you." "Is the respondent currently in custody?" "Yes," Laura answered. The judge nodded once. "Given the evidence, I am granting the temporary restraining order effective immediately." Elena felt something inside her loosen so abruptly she had to steady herself. Relief swept through her like someone had opened a window in a sealed room. The judge continued, "The order will prohibit Mr. Thompson from contacting you, coming to your home, your workplace, or within 500 feet of you. He is required to surrender any firearms within 48 hours. If he violates any part of this order, you are to contact law enforcement immediately." "Yes, Your Honor," Elena said, her voice small but steady. "This order will remain in effect until your hearing date, which will be in approximately 2 weeks. You will need to appear. Do you understand?" "I do." "Good. Stay safe. Next case." It was that simple. Not easy, not painless, but simple. Elena and Laura stepped out of the courtroom and into the hallway. And, for the first time all morning, Elena let her shoulders sag. Laura wrapped an arm around her. "That's one wall up," she said. "Now we build the rest." If that moment hit something deep in you, type "safe now" in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Your comment might be the one that gives another woman courage. They walked out of the courthouse into the early morning sun. The sky was clear, a soft washed-out blue, and the air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass from the lawn across the street. Elena stood on the top step and breathed in deeply, her lungs stretching wider than they had in months. For a moment, she didn't move. She just let the sunlight hit her face, warming the bruise, warming everything inside her that had been cold for too long. She didn't feel victorious, not yet, but she felt something she recognized from years ago, a small, fragile spark she thought she had lost. Laura jingled her keys. "Come on," she said, "coffee. Then we go home and start the next steps." They drove back to Elena's house with the TRO paper sitting proudly in a bright blue folder between them. Every bump on the road made the papers shift slightly, and each movement felt like a reminder. She had taken control today. She had done something irreversible. As they turned onto her street, Elena saw a few curtains twitch in neighboring windows. People had noticed the police earlier. People always noticed. Some out of concern, some out of curiosity, some because they loved watching the cracks in other people's lives. But today, as she stepped out of Laura's car with her chin lifted and her cheek bruised but healing, no one turned away fast enough to hide. And for the first time, Elena didn't care. Let them look. She walked up the driveway, TRO folder in hand, and unlocked her front door. She wasn't walking into fear anymore. She was walking into the beginning of her new life. The house felt different the moment Elena stepped through the door, as if someone had quietly lifted a heavy sheet off the furniture and let the rooms breathe again. It wasn't peaceful yet, not fully, but the air didn't feel suffocating anymore. The tension she used to feel in her shoulders when she crossed the threshold. An old instinct telling her to check Marcus's mood before she said even a single word was gone. She stood in the entryway for a moment, holding the blue folder with the restraining order pressed flat against her stomach. The morning light poured through the kitchen window and landed on the table, where the napkins she and Laura had folded hours ago still sat, slightly wilted but somehow triumphant. The smell of pancakes lingered faintly, softer now, and this time it didn't make her stomach knot. It smelled like something that belonged to her again. Laura set her bag down on the couch and took a slow look around the room. "We should pack up his things today," she said matter-of-factly. "Not because he's coming back. He's not. But because clearing this space is the first step to clearing the rest." Elena nodded. The thought of touching Marcus' belongings made her skin crawl a little, but it also made her feel something unexpected. Readiness. She wasn't avoiding it anymore. She wasn't pretending this was temporary. She had a court order, police documentation, and a friend who refused to leave her side. Before they started, Laura held out her phone. "Do you want coffee, food, or do you want to get this over with first?" Elena exhaled. "Let's do it now," she said, "before I lose my nerve." If you've ever had to clean your life of someone who hurt you, type "clearing out" in the comments and say what country you're in. You'd be shocked how many people start healing the moment they pack a box. They began in the bedroom. Marcus's shoes lined the wall like soldiers. His shirts were hung in strict color order, a habit he always insisted made life easier, though it never seemed to make him happier. Elena reached for the first hanger, a pale gray button-down he wore to Sunday brunches, and placed it carefully into a black trash bag. The sound of the hanger scraping against the metal rod echoed louder than it should have. She paused, fingers still touching the fabric. Memories rose up like smoke. Trips, Arguments, moments where she had convinced herself things were going to get better, that the man she had married still lived inside the one who stood in front of her now. Laura stepped beside her. "Don't think too long," she said gently. "Just move." Elena nodded, blinked hard, and kept going, shirt by shirt, shoe by shoe, belt by belt. The trash bags filled fast. The room slowly shifted shape, with every item removed, becoming a space she recognized more and more as her own. At one point, Elena stopped and touched the empty side of the closet. "He used to say this space was for when we grew together," she murmured quietly. Laura pulled down another hanger. "Then consider this the real growth." They moved to the nightstands next. Marcus's drawer was a mixture of cologne bottles, receipts, cheap watches he swore were expensive, and small objects that never meant anything to her. She dumped them into a box without pausing. But when she reached the bottom of the drawer, she found something she didn't expect. A photograph. It was from 5 years earlier, a vacation they once took to the coast. Elena was laughing in the picture, eyes bright, hair windblown, leaning on Marcus' shoulder. Marcus was looking at the camera with a rare, honest smile. Elena stared at it for a long moment. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she simply felt a soft, sinking sadness, the kind that comes with accepting that someone you loved once existed but was replaced long before you realized it. Laura spoke softly. "Keep it or toss it, either is fine." Elena folded the photo once, then again, and placed it gently in the bottom drawer of her own nightstand. "I'll decide later," she said. By noon, they had filled 6 large bags with Marcus's belongings. Laura labeled them clearly, M. Thompson Do Not Open, and moved them into the garage. The house felt lighter with every drag of the trash bags across the floor. They stopped for lunch, cold pancakes, rewarmed bacon, and fresh coffee. They ate at the table where the officers had sat hours earlier. This time, the silence was comfortable. Halfway through the meal, Elena's phone buzzed. The vibration was sharp enough to jolt her spine. She picked it up slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. The screen showed a text message from Marcus' number. "This is your fault. Come get me from the station." Now, Elena's blood ran cold. Laura leaned over her shoulder, reading it too. "Violation," she said instantly. "Screenshot it." Elena did. Then she forwarded it to Officer Ramirez and blocked the number. 5 minutes later, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. "You'll regret this." But Elena didn't panic this time. She didn't freeze or crumble or second guess. She calmly screenshotted it, forwarded it to Laura, to Ramirez, and filed it away in a new folder Laura created on the spot. Evidence, contact, attempts. If you've ever had someone try to pull you back into the chaos you're escaping, type "not going back" in the comments and tell me your country. Someone else will see it and feel less alone. The rest of the day was a blur of practical work, changing the locks, installing the Ring camera that had sat unopened in the hall closet for months, checking every window latch, and setting up motion lights outside. Laura made a list on her phone with check marks. Change locks, done. New security codes, done. Camera setup, done. Document all contact, ongoing, pack Marcus belonging, done. Each checkmark felt like rebuilding a wall that someone had kicked in. By evening, the house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, less like fear, more like reclaiming territory. At 7:42 p.m., while they were sorting through a pile of old mail, someone knocked on the door. It was Mrs. Hargrove from across the street, still in her robe, holding 2 mugs of tea. Her white hair was pulled back with a clip, and her posture was straight enough to reveal she had been standing guard by her window all day. "I heard the police this morning," she said simply. "I didn't want to pry, but I wanted to bring this and tell you I saw things. I should have spoken sooner." Elena felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." she whispered. Mrs. Hargrove handed her the mug with both hands. You're not alone anymore, she said. Not on this street. If you're still reading this part of the story and you feel that shift from isolation to support, type not alone and tell me where you're watching from. It matters more than you think. After the neighbor left, Elena and Laura sat quietly on the couch, sipping tea. Outside, the motion lights clicked on every so often as a car passed or a squirrel darted through the yard. But instead of making her flinch, the lights made Elena feel safe. Later that night, when Laura finally slept on the couch and Elena lay in the guest room with new sheets washed in lavender detergent, she stared up at the ceiling and realized something profound. She didn't miss him, not even a little. She missed who she thought he was, but the man who slapped her at 3:17 in the morning wasn't someone she had lost. He was someone she had escaped. And for the first time, the darkness in the room didn't scare her. It felt like a blank page. The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of morning that didn't demand anything from her. No slammed doors, no angry footsteps, no coffee brewed at a specific temperature to avoid irritation. Elena woke before her alarm, lying still in the guest bed that no longer felt like an exile. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender, and the air had that peaceful coolness that only comes before sunrise. She blinked up at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the house, a house that, for the first time in a long time, felt like hers. Laura was already awake in the living room, tapping on her laptop while sipping coffee from Elena's favorite mug. "Morning," she said softly. "I let you sleep." Elena nodded and sat at the edge of the bed, rubbing her hands together as if she needed to warm muscles she forgot she had. "What's the plan today?" "Two things," Laura said. "First, we follow up with the detective assigned to your case. Ramirez left a note saying she'd update us by noon. Second," she closed the laptop gently, "there's a support group. Today at 10, only if you're ready." Elena wasn't sure she was ready. The idea of sitting in a circle with strangers and saying the words, "My husband hit me," made her throat tighten. But something inside her, a small stubborn part that had woken up the moment she took those photos, whispered that silence was how women like her stayed trapped. Speaking, even once, could crack something open. "Okay," she said, "I'll go." Before we walk into that room with her, type "I'm listening" and tell me what country you're watching from. This helps other survivors find the courage to share their stories too. They ate a quiet breakfast, toast with jam, scrambled eggs, nothing fancy. The act of eating something simple without thinking about whether it would set Marcus off felt luxurious. After the dishes were rinsed, Elena changed into a soft blue sweater and dark jeans. Something comfortable, something she didn't have to explain. The community center was a short drive away, a tan brick building with faded white trim, the kind of place where senior yoga classes and children's art camps were held. The parking lot was half full, but Elena could tell instantly which cars belonged to the women attending the support group. They were parked near the side entrance, close enough to the door to feel safe, but not so close as to draw attention. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. A bulletin board pinned with flyers for blood drives, free tax preparation, and parenting workshops lined one wall. Laura walked slightly ahead, not pushing Elena, but clearing the path. At the end of the hallway, two metal doors led into a basement-level multi-purpose room. The lights were warm, not harsh, and the arrangement was simple. 12 folding chairs, all facing inward in a circle. A woman stood near the coffee urn in the corner, arranging paper cups. She had soft curls pulled back loosely, gentle eyes, and a calmness that filled the room like a quiet blanket. "Good morning," she said warmly when they entered. "I'm Mia." "Elena," she replied, her voice small but steady. Mia nodded knowingly. "Grab some tea or coffee if you'd like. We'll start in a few minutes." Elena poured herself chamomile tea, hands trembling just enough to make the spoon clink against the cup. She didn't sit yet. She scanned the room. Women filtered in slowly, some alone, some with friends or sisters, old, young, Latina, black, white, Asian. Some carried notebooks. One clutched a phone so tightly her knuckles looked bloodless. Another had sunglasses on despite being indoors. Not one of them looked at Elena with pity. They looked at her like they understood something she hadn't even said yet. When everyone arrived, Mia clapped her hands softly. Okay, ladies, let's begin. The group settled into their chairs. Elena sat between Laura and a woman about her age wearing a sweater that looked hand knit. A hush fell over the room, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with possibility. Mia spoke gently. This is a safe space. Nothing leaves this room without your permission. You don't need to share today. You don't need to speak at all if you're not ready. Just being here is enough. Elena looked down at her hands, fingers tightening around her paper cup. The first woman to speak was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a low braid. My name is Ruth, she said, quietly. I left my husband 5 years ago. He broke my ribs once. I stayed longer than I should have. Today I want to talk about how I still jump when the doorbell rings. The next one was younger, maybe early 20s. I'm Kara. Mine was emotional abuse. Years of it. I didn't realize how deep it ran until I tried to leave. He never hit me, but sometimes I wish he had, because bruises heal and people believe them. A ripple of murmurs filled the circle. Agreement, recognition, the silent language of survivors. Elena felt a lump rising in her throat. She stared at the floor, breathing slowly, but her heart wouldn't settle. Each woman's words landed in her chest like small stones, heavy, but strangely grounding. She wasn't alone. She wasn't the only one who had lived inside a quiet war. There were women who had survived worse and were still here, still speaking, still living. Mia looked around the circle. Would anyone new like to share? Elena didn't raise her hand. She didn't intend to speak, but her mouth opened anyway. I'm Elena, she said softly. Every head turned toward her, not in judgment, but with quiet, steady attention. My husband hit me. Her voice cracked on the last word. The room didn't gasp. No one looked shocked. They simply heard her. She breathed again. It wasn't the first time, but last night, I realized I might not survive if I stayed. Her eyes blurred. She blinked hard. So I called the police, and they took him away. The woman beside her placed a warm hand on her knee, light as a feather. And this morning, Elena continued, I filed a restraining order. Saying it out loud made her chest feel lighter. She hadn't realized how much the silence had been choking her. A few women nodded slowly. One whispered, Good for you. If you're still here and you feel the weight of this moment, type healing and share your country. This is how we build a community that stands together. Elena swallowed and added, I thought I was alone. I thought I was weak, but sitting here, I don't feel weak. Mia smiled softly. You're not. Weak people don't walk into courts. Weak people don't photograph bruises. Weak people don't leave. The dam finally broke. A few tears slipped down Elena's cheek, but Mia handed her a tissue without interrupting the moment. Elena wasn't sobbing, just releasing, like a pressure valve finally loosening after years of being wound too tight. The rest of the session passed like a warm current around her. Stories shared, coping strategies discussed, moments of quiet where the silence wasn't fear, but understanding. One woman talked about checking her doors 3 times before bed. Another talked about nightmares that felt too real. A third talked about reclaiming her house by painting one wall a different color. It changed everything, she said, and she meant it. Elena spoke again near the end. I didn't expect to feel anything. I thought I'd still be numb. She wiped her cheek. But I feel something, like maybe I'm not drowning anymore. No one clapped, no one applauded, but every woman in the circle nodded, a silent wave of acknowledgement that wrapped around her like a blanket. When the session ended, a few women hugged her. Elena didn't flinch. Their arms felt strong, human, real. As she and Laura walked out of the building, Elena felt the sun on her face. The bruise still ached, but the ache felt smaller somehow. Not gone, not yet, but shrinking. The world looked slightly different, brighter, wider, and for the first time in a very long time, she had the smallest but clearest thought. I might actually be okay. The drive home from the support group felt shorter than the drive there. On the way in, every red light had felt like a test. Every passing car, a reminder that the world was moving on with its routines, while Elena's life had split in two. On the way back, the same streets looked different, like someone had peeled a thin film off reality and sharpened the edges. She watched sunlight flicker on windshields, kids grouped at a bus stop, a man walking his dog with a takeaway coffee in hand, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel like an invisible ghost drifting past them. She felt present. Laura glanced over from the driver's seat. "How are you really feeling?" she asked quietly. Elena thought about it. "Tired," she admitted. "Like, I just ran a marathon in my head, but also less alone." "That's the point," Laura said. "Now, when Marcus tries to rewrite the story, you're not the only narrator." Before we get to what happens next, type "not alone" in the comments and say where you're watching from. It's a small thing that tells someone in your country they're not crazy and they're not the only one. When they pulled onto the street, Elena saw Mrs. Hargrove standing on her porch in her familiar faded robe, arms folded, watching their car approach. It wasn't the casual kind of watching nosy neighbors did when they pretended to water plants. This was something else. Guard duty. Witnessing. As Elena stepped out of the car, the older woman called softly, "Elena, dear, do you have a moment?" Her tone carried more weight than the words. "Of course," Elena replied, exchanging a brief look with Laura before walking across the strip of lawn that separated their houses. Up close, she noticed that Mrs. Hargrove's hands were trembling slightly, but her eyes were steady. "Come inside," she said, "both of you. I have something I should have given you a long time ago." The living room was neat and old-fashioned, the kind of space that smelled faintly of lemon oil, dust, and rose-scented powder. Family photos lined the mantel. A crocheted blanket rested over the back of the sofa. Mrs. Hargrove motioned for them to sit, then reached for a small dish on the coffee table and picked up something that gleamed dully in the light. "A USB drive. My late husband," she began, voice tight, "had a habit of worrying about things. He'd say the world was going to hell and the least we could do was keep an eye on our little corner. He installed cameras, front and back. They've been running for years. I shut most of it down after he passed, but some of it kept recording. I never thought much of it until I saw what happened the other night." Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You saw—" Mrs. Hargrove nodded slowly. "I didn't see the slap itself inside your kitchen, but I saw him pacing, yelling at the window, throwing something outside, and I saw you walk out later with your hand on your face, like you were holding yourself together." She swallowed. "This isn't the first time I've heard shouting from your house. I told myself it wasn't my place, that you were both adults, that you'd figure it out. That was cowardly." She placed the USB drive in Elena's open palm, her fingers warm and dry. "I pulled the latest footage and saved it on this. There's audio from outside, enough to show his tone, his rage, how often it's happened. If you want it, it's yours. If the police need it, they can have it too. I'll testify if necessary." Elena stared at the little piece of metal and plastic resting in her hand. It was so small, but it felt heavier than the restraining order folder at home. "Why now?" she asked, not accusing, just genuinely curious. Because, Mrs. Hargrove said, looking her straight in the eye, I saw the police car. I saw him in cuffs, and I saw you this morning standing on your porch with that bruise and your head held high. That told me you weren't hoping this would blow over. You're done. So the least I can do is stop pretending I didn't see what I saw. If you've ever wished someone had stepped up and said, I saw it too, type witness in the comments and add your country. You might encourage someone to stop looking away. Back at Elena's house, they plugged the USB into Laura's laptop at the kitchen table. The pancakes were gone, replaced by the nervous buzz of anticipation. Laura opened the video folder, and there it was. Time-stamped clips, each a few minutes long. The first video showed the front of the house, the porch light illuminating Marcus's silhouette as he stormed outside, pacing up and down, running his hands through his hair, talking loudly to himself. You couldn't hear every word, but enough phrases cut through. Always ruin everything. Ungrateful. Can't do one simple thing. Another clip showed him throwing something across the yard, a kitchen towel maybe, or a small object from his hand, then marching back inside. The next video was quieter, but the audio caught, his voice raised through the walls, muffled but sharp, followed by a thud against the window frame. Then came the one that made Elena's stomach flip. The camera caught her stepping outside, one hand pressed against her cheek, shoulders hunched, staring at the ground as if she was afraid the earth might look back. The timestamp matched the moment she remembered going outside for air when her ears were still ringing. There was no bruised cheek visible in the dark, but the posture said everything. Laura watched the footage, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Combined with your photos, your medical report, and your statement, she said. This isn't just your word against his. It's a pattern. A documented pattern. Judges love patterns, and prosecutors build careers on them. Elena replayed the clip once more, watching Marcus's angry pacing in the front yard. The way his body moved, jerky, aggressive, reminded her of arguments over the years she'd tried to downplay. The footage made them undeniable. She forwarded the video links to Officer Ramirez and attached a short note. Neighbor footage from night of assault. She is willing to testify. E. Thompson. Then she sat back in her chair and let the reality sink in. Her story wasn't just a story anymore, it was a case. If you're still here and you feel that shift from maybe I'm overreacting to, no, this is real, type this is real and tell me where you're watching from, that moment matters. By early afternoon, Ramirez called. I received the footage, she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of something Elena recognized now as approval. I've added it to your file. We're also documenting his text and email violations. That works heavily in your favor. Does it change anything? Elena asked. It strengthens everything, Ramirez replied. The DA is already looking at the assault charge. With the threats and the recorded behavior, they may consider adding a stalking or harassment component if he continues. For now, keep forwarding anything he sends. Don't respond, don't engage, just document. After the call, Elena stared at her phone for a moment, then set it down and exhaled slowly. Every piece of evidence, every screenshot, every forwarded email felt like another rung on a ladder pulling her out of a pit she had lived in for far too long. Later that week, an official letter arrived confirming the hearing date for the restraining order extension. Court in 2 weeks. Marcus would have a chance to appear or send counsel. The envelope felt cold in her hands, the ink stark and serious. Elena pinned the notice to the corkboard in the kitchen where they used to hang grocery lists and takeaway menus. Life began to settle into a new kind of routine. She went back to work at the library after taking a few days off. Her boss as good as his word. Take what you need, he had said on the phone, and he meant it. At the library, the smell of old paper and dust felt grounding. She shelved books, helped children find picture stories about animals, guided teenagers to quiet corners with fantasy novels and textbooks. No one there knew the full story. To them, she was simply Elena, the kind librarian with the thoughtful smile and the slight purple shadow on her cheek that they didn't ask about. But something had changed in her interactions. When a teenager checked out a book on relationships, she paid attention to the way they hesitated before asking questions. When an older woman took out a brochure about estate planning with trembling hands, Elena looked into her eyes a second longer and said, "If you ever need help finding information about lawyers or resources, let me know." The woman nodded, eyes bright. Home became a different world. Laura went back to her own apartment, but checked in every day. Mrs. Hargrove continued to watch from her porch like a quiet guardian. The motion lights flashed on and off at night, but each time Elena checked the camera feed, it showed nothing more sinister than a cat, a raccoon, or the wind. And then, about a week after the assault, came the next crack in the illusion that Marcus was simply going to back down. Elena was pouring herself a cup of tea one evening when her phone buzzed with a notification from the Ring app. Motion detected, front yard. Her heart stuttered. She opened the feed with a thumb that suddenly felt clumsy. The video showed a man standing across the street, half in the shadow of a tree, half in the yellow wash of the street lamp. He wasn't on her property. He wasn't ringing her bell. He was just standing there, watching the house. His face was turned away from the camera, but his build, the curve of his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other in restless agitation, told her everything she needed to know. Marcus? He stayed there for almost 3 minutes. Then he walked away, disappearing out of frame, leaving behind nothing but a spike in Elena's pulse and a clip saved to the cloud. She forwarded to Ramirez without a word. If your chest got tight reading that, type "still watching" in the comments and say where you're watching from. This is how abusers often operate when they can't come close openly. Ramirez called not long after. "He didn't step on your property," she said, "but given the TRO and his history, this is concerning. We'll log it. If he escalates, approaches the door, leaves anything, tries to contact you directly again, we'll push harder for additional charges. For now, keep your doors locked, keep your lights on, and don't change your routine out of fear. That's what he wants." That night, Elena slept with the bedroom door locked and the bat within reach. But she slept. Not deeply, not dreamlessly, but more than she had the week before. Each piece of evidence made her nervous system flare and then settle a little quicker. Fear was still there, but it was no longer running the show alone. In the quiet moments, usually late at night, when the house hummed and the world felt smaller, she would sit at the kitchen table with a sketch pad and pencil. She didn't know why she started drawing again. It began as random lines, then shapes, then slowly it turned into something else. A woman standing at a window, a dark figure outside, a door closing, a light turning on. The lines weren't pretty at first. They were shaky, rough, searching, but they were hers. One evening, she caught herself shading the outline of a bruise on the woman's face, carefully blending it from deep purple to fading yellow. Instead of flinching, she made the bruise larger, then smaller, then turned it into something else. A patch of gold, a mark of transformation. She stared at the drawing for a long time. Maybe, she thought, the things that had been used to break her could be turned into something else entirely. The urgent care report arrived sooner than expected. Elena was sitting at her kitchen table late one evening, sketching absent-mindedly in the margin of an old notebook, when her phone buzzed with an email notification. She opened it slowly, half expecting bad news, half prepared for a neutral medical summary she'd need to print and bring to court. Instead, the report was blunt, clinical, and undeniably clear. Contusion along the zygomatic arch with noted swelling, soft tissue trauma consistent with blunt force impact, possible hairline fracture, recommend follow-up imaging, documented signs of recent physical assault. The words hit with a strange mixture of validation and sorrow. Seeing it in writing, cold, emotionless medical terminology on a PDF, made the truth feel sharper, realer. She forwarded the report to Laura immediately and then attached it to her evidence folder. Within minutes, Laura texted back, "Perfect. Judges trust doctors. Bring 2 printed copies tomorrow." Tomorrow was the hearing, the first one. The temporary restraining order would be reviewed for extension. Marcus would be there, or his attorney, or both. Elena closed the laptop softly, hands trembling just slightly. "If you're still here, type steady and tell me your country. You don't have to share details. That one word helps someone sitting in fear feel less alone tonight." That night, she barely slept, not because she was scared of him showing up. She had locks, cameras, neighbors watching, and a bat within reach. But because she knew that courtrooms had a strange way of making victims feel small, even when the truth was on their side. She had watched enough trials on TV, read enough stories online, seen enough women dismissed because they didn't cry the right way, didn't speak loudly enough, didn't break down when expected. By dawn, she decided something quietly but firmly. She wasn't going to perform anything for anyone. She wasn't going to cry to look sympathetic. She wasn't going to tremble to look afraid. She would walk in exactly as she was, hurt but standing. Laura arrived at 7 a.m. with coffee, bagels, and her usual unshakable calm. "Ready?" she asked, handing Elena a cup. "No," Elena said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Laura smiled. That's readiness disguised as honesty. They drove to the courthouse in silence, each lost in thought. The parking lot was already filling with cars. People in suits hurried toward the entrance. Women with folders pressed to their chests stood under trees, breathing deeply before walking in. Elena exhaled slowly as she followed Laura through the security checkpoint. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she imagined, with wooden benches polished from years of anxious hands sliding along their surfaces. A few people sat scattered around. Elena noticed a woman wiping her eyes, another whispering with her attorney, a man sitting with his arms crossed, and a scowl so familiar it made her stomach twist. Laura guided her to a seat near the front. The bailiff stood by the door. The judge hadn't entered yet. And then Marcus walked in. He wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't in orange. He was in a suit, one that didn't quite fit, shoulders a bit too tight, sleeves slightly too long. His hair was combed back, and he had that look she recognized instantly. The "I'm the victim here" expression he used whenever someone questioned him. But there was something else too. Dark circles under his eyes, a twitch in his jaw, a kind of worn down agitation that told her jail hadn't agreed with him. He saw her. He froze. And then he smiled. Not kindly, not apologetically. A smug, twisted little smile that said, "You think you're winning? Watch this." He sat with his attorney, a young man who looked nervous and unprepared. Elena watched them whisper. Marcus gestured toward her as if pointing out an enemy he fully expected to crush. "Before we move forward, type court day in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. These moments are the ones that change everything." The bailiff announced, "All rise," and Judge Alvarez entered the room. She was in her mid-50s, her hair pulled into a braid streaked with silver, and her eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense like paper. She took her seat without dramatic pause and began reviewing the docket. Case number 24, True 1938, Thompson versus Thompson. Petitioner present? Laura nudged Elena gently. "Stand." Elena rose. "Present, Your Honor." Respondent presents? Marcus stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "Present." "Very well. I have reviewed the petitioner's temporary order request, supporting documents, photographic evidence, medical report, and submitted video files." The judge flipped a page, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson, please step forward." Elena approached the podium, hands steady, posture straight. She felt the weight of Marcus's stare, but didn't turn toward him. Judge Alvarez studied her for a long second. I can see the injury clearly, she said, her voice calm. Can you briefly summarize the events leading to this application? Elena explained. She didn't dramatize, she didn't embellish. She used plain language describing the argument, the slap, the photographs, the police call, the medical visit, and the threats that followed. Her voice shook only once when she mentioned how long it had been happening. And the judge nodded, taking notes with a pen that clicked softly. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stepped to the podium with the false confidence of a man who assumed charm and denial would save him. Your Honor, she's exaggerating. We had a little argument. Married couples argue. She burned dinner and got dramatic. She hit me first, and now she's trying to punish me because she got emotional. The judge glanced over her glasses at him. Do you have photographic evidence of your injuries? Marcus faltered. Well, no, but do you have medical documentation? No, but any witnesses to your version of events? No, he said, voice thinning. Do you dispute the time-stamped photographs of her injuries? She bruises easily. Do you dispute the video footage from the neighbor showing your behavior that night? Marcus blinked rapidly. That's taken out of context. Judge Alvarez set the papers down slowly, very slowly. Mr. Thompson, the only context that matters here is the safety of the petitioner. Marcus's mouth opened, then shut again. The judge turned to Alina. Ms. Thompson, do you still request a restraining order extension? Yes, Your Honor. And do you fear for your safety? The truth rose in her throat like a tide. Yes, Elena said. I do. Judge Alvarez nodded once, the decision made even before she finished speaking. Temporary restraining order is extended for 6 months pending divorce proceedings. Respondent is prohibited from contacting, approaching, or harassing the petitioner directly or through third parties. Respondent is to complete a state-certified 52-week batterers intervention program. All firearms to be surrendered within 48 hours. Violations will result in immediate arrest. Marcus stiffened, face darkening. Elena didn't move, didn't break, didn't shrink. Before the judge dismissed them, she looked directly at Elena, really looked, with something like pride hidden under her professional calm. You did the right thing, she said plainly. Stay vigilant, stay safe. If this moment hit you, type protected and share your country. You never know who needs to see your presence today. As Elena left the courtroom, Laura squeezed her hand, whispering, Phase 1 complete. She believed her. The judge believed her. The evidence believed her. And for the first time, Elena realized something she had never let herself feel before. This wasn't survival anymore. This was justice, slow, steady, and finally moving in her favor. The weekend after the hearing felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that made Elena uneasy because it felt too much like the quiet before a storm. She kept checking her phone, expecting another text from a burner number or an email from a strange address, but nothing came. Laura checked in once in the morning and once at night. Maria's drove by twice each evening. Miss Hargrove kept her porch light on like a silent lighthouse, but Marcus stayed silent. Elena told herself silence was a good thing, that it meant he'd finally realized the situation was bigger than him, that maybe, just maybe, the restraining order had clipped his behavior. But silence from a man like Marcus wasn't peace. It was strategy. If you've ever felt that eerie, heavy stillness right before someone explodes again, type, I know this silence, and tell me your country. You might be speaking for someone who can't. By Monday, the quiet broke. It was 6:12 a.m. Elena was walking to the kitchen, still half asleep, thinking only about making tea before work. The morning light was soft and pale, spilling across the tiles. She reached for the kettle. Then she stepped on something sharp. She gasped and pulled her foot back, heart hammering. A shard of glass sat under her heel, bright, jagged, unmistakable. She looked down. The kitchen floor was littered in glittering fragments, hundreds of them, like someone had taken a window and smashed it over the tile. Her breath caught. She turned slowly toward the living room. The front window, the big one facing the street, had a hole blown through the center, spiderweb cracks reaching in every direction. A brick lay on the carpet several feet inside the house, wrapped in torn white paper. Elena's pulse spiked so hard she felt dizzy. "Laura!" she yelled instinctively, even though she knew Laura wasn't there. She backed away from the window, swallowing hard, forcing herself not to panic, not to run outside barefoot into the glass-strewn kitchen. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and opened her camera. Click. She documented everything, the floor, the damage, the brick, the paper still clinging to it. Then she finally approached the weapon he had thrown through her home, her sanctuary. The paper was stained with dirt and a smear of red spray paint. She peeled it back carefully. A single word stretched across it, uneven and angry. BITCH. Elena's breath hitched. She closed her eyes, not out of fear, out of a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. Violence from Marcus had always been hidden in private moments, behind doors, whispered apologies, and gaslighting. But this was public. Actually, this was loud. This was deliberate. She took a photo of the word, hands shaking but steady enough to capture the evidence. Then she stepped onto the porch. The driveway told the rest of the story. Across the concrete, sprayed in thick, dripping red letters, was another word. MINE. That was the moment fear and fury braided together inside her chest. Not panic, clarity. Sharp, cold, undeniable clarity. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just lashing out. He was escalating. Her fingers moved before her mind caught up. She dialed Ramirez. The officer answered immediately. "Elena, talk to me." "He broke my window," Elena said, voice steady but trembling beneath. "There's a brick. And he spray painted my driveway." "Are you safe right now?" "Yes, I think so. I'm on my way. Stay inside. Do not touch anything else. Do not go outside again." Elena double-locked the door, turned on every light she could reach, and stood in the center of the living room, refusing to be afraid in her own house. She texted Laura one word, "Rick." Laura replied instantly, "On my way. Don't move." If you're still reading, type, "This is escalation," and add where you're watching from. Someone else going through the same thing will see you and feel braver. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway. Ramirez stepped out first, uniform, crisp expression, deadly serious. She walked directly inside without waiting for Elena to explain. "Show me," she said. Elena led her to the kitchen. Ramirez surveyed the glass, the damage, the brick, the slur. Her jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. "Did you hear anything overnight?" she asked. "No," Elena said. "I slept through it. It was probably thrown between 3 and 5 a.m. Most vandals like darkness, but hate deep night." She photographed everything. She bagged the brick. She swabbed the spray paint streaks on the paper. She took close-ups of the driveway letters. Another officer measured the impact angle on the window. When Laura arrived, she stood next to Elena, arms crossed like a shield. Ramirez walked over. "This isn't vandalism. This is intimidation. This is targeted, and this is a violation of the restraining order. We're escalating this to the detective bureau and adding criminal mischief, harassment, and potential stalking charges." Elena nodded numbly. "Will he be arrested again?" Ramirez exhaled. "It depends on timing and evidence. But this is strong. Very strong. We'll push for a warrant." Then she added with a softer tone, "You're doing everything right. Keep documenting, keep calling. People like him escalate because they're losing control. That's when the law steps in. When the police finally left, the house felt strange. Too bright, too exposed. Laura swept up the glass for her, refusing to let Alina step into the kitchen until every shard was gone. They taped cardboard over the broken window. The spray-painted driveway remained, drying into the concrete like a wound that wouldn't fade. Should I leave? Alina asked quietly. Find somewhere else to stay? Laura shook her head. Leaving rewards him. You have cameras, you have police, you have neighbors. You're not running from your own home. Elena sat on the couch, staring at her hands. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt like grief. This isn't going to stop, is it? She whispered. Laura answered honestly, not until the law stops him, and that moment is coming a lot faster than he thinks. Later that afternoon, Elena received an email from Ramirez. Detective assigned, evidence logged, case upgraded, will update soon. She stared at the words until they blurred slightly. Not long after, she received another notification from her Ring doorbell. Movement detected. She froze. But when she opened it, it wasn't Marcus. It was the neighborhood kids, staring at the sprayed word on the driveway with confused expressions, pointing, whispering, stepping backwards slowly like they'd wandered into something they didn't understand. Elena closed the app with a shaking hand. The violence wasn't invisible anymore. It wasn't private. It had spilled into the street where it could stain more than just concrete. She called the city cleanup service and scheduled removal. Then she sat at her kitchen table with a pen and paper and wrote everything down. Every sound she remembered, every detail, every minute, every emotion. Her hand didn't stop moving until she had 6 full pages. That night, she didn't sleep in the guest room. She didn't sleep in the master bedroom either. She lay on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the bat within reach, the cameras on live view, feeling both weaker and stronger than she had ever felt in her life. She wasn't safe. Not yet. But she wasn't helpless anymore. The law was watching. Her neighbors were watching. And for the first time, the danger was no longer something she carried alone. Detective Singh arrived the next morning at 9:14 a.m. sharp. Elena knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock since dawn, counting down the minutes, her nerves vibrating like wires under tension. The night had been long. Every creak of the house, every distant bark, every passing car had made her lift her head from the blanket, the bat always within arm's reach. But seeing the detective's dark sedan pull into her driveway sent a wave of relief through her chest, so strong she actually had to sit down for a moment. Detective Arya Singh was not what Elena expected. She wasn't tall or intimidating. She didn't thunder into the room with a badge and command everyone to sit. She was quiet, precise, observant. She dressed in muted colors, a charcoal blazer, soft black curls pulled back neatly, a notebook tucked under her arm. Her presence didn't dominate the house, it steadied it. She greeted Elena with a calm nod. Good morning. I'm Detective Singh. Officer Ramirez briefed me on the situation. I'm here to document, to gather, and to help you get ahead of him. There was no pity in her voice, no skepticism, just fact. Before the detective began, she asked Elena a simple question. Do you feel safe enough to talk right now? Elena nodded, a little surprised by how much that question mattered. Before we dive into what happens next, type I'm here and include your country. It helps survivors around the world feel like this story is happening with them, not to them. Singh began with the brick. She photographed it again, even though the police had bagged it. She took detailed shots of where it had landed, the broken window frame, the spray paint stains on the driveway, the angle and height of the impact. She asked Elena to show her the exact path she'd walked that morning. where she stepped, where she froze, where she found the words scrawled across concrete like a warning carved into stone. And she asked for the USB footage. Elena handed her the drive Mrs. Hargrove had given her. Singh plugged it into her laptop and watched silently. No commentary. No dramatic reactions, just a slow, deliberate tilt of her head now and then, her pen moving across her notebook. When the video showed Elena stepping outside holding her cheek, Singh paused it, zoomed in, and took a screenshot. "This," she murmured, "is very strong. Juries don't need to see your bruise if they see your body language." She clicked to the next clip, the one of Marcus pacing outside like a storm, trapped in human skin, muttering angrily to himself, his gestures jerky and uncontrolled. Singh leaned back slightly. "He escalates quickly. This is useful." Elena swallowed. "Useful? How?" "To establish pattern," Singh said. "To demonstrate loss of control. To show a prelude to violence." She turned to Elena. "Domestic abusers almost never escalate in straight lines. They escalate in spirals. Small, then big, then quiet, then catastrophic. But they always follow a pattern." For the first time, Elena realized her story wasn't just something happening to her. It was something being mapped, tracked, understood, legally documented. After the videos, Singh reviewed the screenshots Elena had taken of the texts and emails. She photographed the phone screen, then asked Elena to forward everything digitally to a secure police address. "These threats," Singh said, tapping the email with her pen, "combined with the vandalism, the window, the driveway, and the violation of the TRO, justify elevating this from simple harassment to stalking with aggravating circumstances." Elena blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means prosecutors take it seriously," Singh said, "and it means his lawyer will start sweating." If you've ever felt this shift from powerless to supported, type "I feel this" in the comments and say where you're watching from. Someone else needs your strength today. Singh walked Elena through the next steps. 1. A judge would review the new evidence within 48 hours. 2. If approved, a warrant would be issued for Marcus's arrest. 3. His bail could be denied due to escalation. 4. Additional charges could stack: criminal mischief, stalking, protective order violations. Elena listened, each point landing heavier and more real than the last. Then Singh asked a question Elena didn't expect. "Has he ever threatened suicide to control you?" Elena froze. "Yes," she whispered. "Once, after a big fight. He said he'd end it all and it would be my fault." Singh nodded slowly. "That will come up again. It's one of the most common manipulation tactics at this stage. If he sends a message like that, do not respond. Forward it to me immediately." Elena felt her stomach twist. Why would he do that now? "Because," Singh said plainly, "you're slipping out of his grasp. When control fades, desperation spikes. But that's not your burden. That's his behavior being documented." After 2 hours, Singh closed her notebook, stood, and said, "I'm recommending immediate protective surveillance around your property for the next week. You'll see more patrol cars. Don't panic." Elena nodded. "Thank you." Singh paused at the door. "You're doing incredibly well, Elena. Most people don't handle evidence this cleanly. Keep sent texts and emails, keep your cameras on, and understand this." She looked Elena straight in the eyes. "This is no longer a story he can twist. Your documentation is stronger than his denial." When the detective left, Elena felt something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Legitimacy. Her pain wasn't invisible. Her fear wasn't being minimized. Her truth wasn't being debated. It was on paper, on video, in police reports, in a detective's case file. By afternoon, the neighborhood knew something had happened. Not because Elena told anyone, but because patrol cars cruised by every few hours, because yellow tape still fluttered at the corner of her driveway, because neighbors stood on porches, whispering into their coffee mugs, because the word mind, though faded by weather, still stained the concrete like dried blood. Mrs. Hargrove knocked on her door again around 5 p.m., carrying lemon bars wrapped in foil. "Cops told me they might be around more for a bit," she said. "Just letting you know, you're not alone. I'm keeping watch." Later, Laura arrived with takeout and sat with Elena on the couch, both women exhausted but grounded. They talked through every instruction Singh gave. Elena repeated the steps until she had them memorized. Before bed, Elena checked her Ring camera feed one more time. Nothing, just quiet cars, trees blowing, streetlights humming. But even if Marcus appeared again, the difference now was huge. She wasn't defenseless anymore. She wasn't alone. And the system had eyes on him. That night, Elena finally slept, not deeply, not dreamlessly, but peacefully enough that when she woke in the morning, the fear didn't hit her like a punch. It rose slowly, manageable, like something she could breathe through. She checked her phone and found a single new voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. It was silent for 3 seconds. Then a man's breath. Then a whisper. "You think you won?" She froze. Board, attach, send. Straight to Detective Singh. No fear, no shaking hands, no hesitation. This time it was evidence. The day the sentencing came felt nothing like the day of the restraining order hearing. It wasn't sharp and terrifying. It wasn't full of adrenaline or trembling hands or a sense that one wrong breath might make everything fall apart again. Instead, it felt strangely ordinary, like waking up on a morning when the weather had finally broken after a long storm. Elena dressed slowly. No blazer, no disguise, no careful makeup to hide anything, just a soft cream sweater, comfortable jeans, and hair loosely clipped back. She looked like herself, not a version of herself built for survival. Laura picked her up, as always. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," Elena said, and she meant it. Court was quick, efficient, almost anticlimactic. Marcus stood between two deputies, shackled at the wrists, thinner than she remembered, a faded version of the man she used to know. His eyes darted toward her every few seconds, as if searching her face for something he believed he was owed. Fear, maybe, or regret, or softness. He didn't find any. Judge Alvarez read the charges: felony assault, criminal mischief, violating a protective order, conspiracy to commit harassment, and delivered the sentence with no theatrics. 18 months in county, followed by mandatory counseling, probation, financial restitution, and a permanent no-contact order. Marcus opened his mouth like he might speak, but the judge cut him off with a single, sharp look. "This court has heard all it needs from you." And just like that, it was over. Elena didn't look back when they led him away. She didn't need to. He was no longer an earthquake beneath her feet. He was paperwork, a case number, a man the system was now responsible for. On the courthouse steps, Laura hugged her with an intensity that cracked a piece of the old armor, still clinging to her ribs. "It's done," Laura whispered. Elena inhaled the cold morning air, felt it press against her lungs, fill the empty spaces that fear once occupied. "It's done." If you've walked through something like this or know someone who has, type stronger in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence might help someone else take their first step. Life didn't magically fix itself the next day. Healing wasn't a sunrise. It was a slow, shifting tide, gentle some days, violent on others. There were nights Elena still woke at 3:17 IWemen with her heart pounding. There were mornings when she stared at her reflection and expected to see fear in her eyes again. But each day the fear faded a little more. Sophia flew in for a long weekend. They painted the dining room a warm sage green. Mrs. Hargrove brought lemon bars and said, "I'm proud of you, child," with tears that made Elena's throat tighten. The support group became a weekly ritual, a circle where bruises turned into stories and stories turned into strength. Art took over her house. Her hands were stained with paint again, but this time not from frantic, trauma-fueled sketches. She painted scenes of women walking through doorways, women standing in moonlight, women holding their own faces gently. She painted a phoenix rising not from flames, but from pancake batter, wings made of resilience, fire made of quiet defiance. When the local gallery owner came to pick up her latest piece, he'd asked, "What do you call this one?" She looked at the painting, a kitchen table with 4 seats, 3 empty, sunlight streaming across pancakes that looked like gold coins, and said, "I call it the morning after." It sold in less than a week. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Elena's life unfolded like slow, steady brushstrokes. She rose to assistant director at the library. She led workshops on healing through art. She donated paintings to women's shelters and taught free weekend classes to teens who carried more weight on their shoulders than they ever admitted aloud. One afternoon, while shelving books in the children's section, the new librarian, a gentle Jan named Alex with terrible puns and soft eyes, asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime. She said yes, not because she needed someone, but because she finally knew she didn't. Their relationship unfolded without rushing. He spoke softly. He never raised his voice. He always knocked on her open door before entering a room. He never asked about the bruise on her past unless she wanted to share. And when she did, he listened with quiet respect, never pity. Years slipped by. Elena held exhibitions. She wrote a memoir that made women send her emails at 3 a.m. saying, "You saved me." She built a life that felt stable, honest, real. A life where nothing was hidden, nothing was whispered, nothing required tiptoeing. On the 10-year anniversary of the day she photographed her bruise at 3:29 a.m., she hosted a pancake brunch at her home for survivors from her old support group. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. The table was set for 20, napkins folded the way Rosa had taught her. Women laughed, plates stacked, children ran in barefoot chaos. Someone asked her if she ever thought about him, about Marcus. Elena paused, flipping a pancake. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but only the way you remember a storm. You don't fear it once it's gone. You just respect what it taught you." As the last guests left and the house grew quiet again, Elena took her mug of coffee to the kitchen window. The same window that once held a spiderweb of cracks, the same one shattered by a brick, the same one that nearly made her run from her own life. Outside, the cul-de-sac glowed softly, kids chalked rainbows on driveways. Mrs. Hargrove's porch light still shone like a familiar watchtower. A new family lived in Marcus's cousin's old house. Life had moved on, so had she. She raised her mug slightly toward the street. "2 second breakfasts," she murmured. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt earned. It felt hers. It felt like peace. And when she turned away from the window, the kitchen smelled like safety. And the pancakes were perfect.